Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
So it's not exactly what you might call strong and stable. But after a turbulent couple of weeks, it appears the Prime Minister has brought, well, at least less instability, for the time being at least. The government's legislative programme is in place and Brexit talks are underway. So has Theresa May done enough to steady the ship? And what is the mood among her MPs? Ellie Price reports.
It's been an action-packed story of suspense, drama and intrigue. The latest instalment was hotly anticipated. "I got us into this mess," she told her MPs after the election. "I'll get us out of it." This week, Theresa May tried to do just that. It started with a handshake. To get the Democratic Unionist Party's 10 MPs to back the minority government, the PM pledged £1 billion to Northern Ireland. Opposition parties branded it a bung, and as the week went on, some of her own MPs were less than enthusiastic.
Mr. Speaker, I can barely put into words my anger at the deal my party has done with the DUP.
But having signed that piece of paper, the Tories now had a tight working majority of 13 to pass key Commons votes. It was, at the very least, breathing space. So a deep breath and, midweek, a Labour proposal that the cap on public sector pay rises should be lifted. Some Tory MPs, including ministers, agreed in principle. Labour's challenge failed, but the government had to clarify its position.
We will listen to what people in this House have said before making a final decision.
The public sector pay cap, by the way, was designed to save £5 billion for the public purse by 2020. But the policy looks like it could be on its last legs. Thursday was the big moment, the Queen's speech, which passed, but not without drama. Tory support for a Labour amendment led to a government pledge to fund abortions in England for women from Northern Ireland.
So the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Unlock!
The last-minute compromises in this Queen's speech suggest the Prime Minister is acutely aware of the arithmetic in Parliament. She'll have to listen more to her own MPs, and they know that. One former Cabinet Minister told me every time 7 of us get together, we'll get a concession. And yet, after this week, the Prime Minister may not be such a lame duck after all.
I think the ship is certainly steadier. I think there's a degree of what I call a rolling probation for the Prime Minister at the moment. And I think the Prime Minister's performances in the Chamber, Prime Minister's question time, we had the first one back this week, where she reasserted a deal of her authority. And I think there's a deal of relief and respect for that.
Others say the party should reflect on more than just its current leader.
It doesn't matter if we have Alexander the Great or the Archangel Gabriel as leader unless we have fundamental reform. At the moment, often we have these policies, but it's like a whole load of clothes pegs without a washing line, bringing them together. So we need to explain what we're about. The Conservative Party is there to help working people and their families. The Conservative Party is there because we are the party of the ladder of opportunity to get people up that ladder. We have a moral purpose too, just as the Labour Party do.
So does that mean the heat is off? Several MPs told me the debate within the party is still when, not if, she will stand aside.
Anybody who says it will definitely be Theresa May as the leader of the Conservative Party going into next general election is slightly fooling themselves. All bets are off. It might be. I have to say at the moment it's looking rather unlikely. But conversely, there is absolutely no appetite whatsoever. There are no manoeuvres going on, no operations going on to instigate a leadership challenge to have a new leader of the Conservative Party in the immediate future.
One theory is that Theresa May stays on as PM to negotiate the Brexit divorce bill, to be something of a scapegoat for what will be, at best, controversial, at worst, deeply unpopular, and then to move aside to make way for a less tarnished leader who can take the Conservatives into the next general election. It's the immediate future Theresa May will be focused on. This week a G20 meeting in Hamburg with her other world leader chums. Back home, she can't take her friends for granted and told her own MPs she'd serve as long as you want me to. That story is to be continued.
So let's continue. Joining me now, the Minister for International Trade, Greg Hands. Welcome to the programme.
Morning, Andrew. Morning.
Do you agree with your old Treasury boss, George Osborne, who says that easing up on austerity, quote, would risk repeating the mistakes of the past that led Britain to the point where there was, in the words of that Treasury letter, no money left?
Well, there's no change in government policy, Andrew. We must live within our means, and that is the right thing to do. We've reduced the deficit by 3/4 since 2010. That is work that is still ongoing. It's very important that we keep budget discipline because it's impossible to pay for our public services without having a growing economy, the taxes coming in to pay for all of the services that people want and expect.
So how can you continue to cut the deficit? It's actually rising this year compared with last year. How do you continue to cut the deficit? You've got $1 billion to find for the DUP. You've got to find the money that you couldn't get because you couldn't change national insurance. And if you loosen up on the public sector pay freeze, you've got to find money for that too. How do you do both?
Well, I think it's important to have a prudent fiscal policy, a prudent budgetary policy as we go forward. The Chancellor will be laying out his budget in the autumn.
No, I know that, but how do you square that circle?
Well,
how do you meet all these demands? Your own ministers, cabinet ministers are talking about them, and yet continue with deficit reduction?
It's very important to recognise what we have done on public sector pay. Actually, by having that cap in place, we have saved around 200,000 public sector jobs. We've also done a lot for the lower paid public sector workers by raising the personal allowance from 6,500 to 12,500.
That's fine, but I'm not asking you about that. I'm asking you, how do you meet these demands for extra public spending and continue with deficit reduction?
Well, I think over the last 7 years, the government has had a very good record on this, Andrew, in terms of being able to reduce the deficit
but you've had a pay freeze.
while still putting in place increases in public funding. For example, in the Conservative manifesto, we pledged $4 billion extra on schools. We've promised $8 billion extra on health. We can do the two together, but it does require budget discipline overall in making sure that some things don't get out of control.
You were number 2 in the Treasury during Mr. Osborne's tenure. You protected pensioners with a triple lock, free bus passes, the winter fuel allowance, but you trebled tuition fees on young folk. You made it impossible for many of them to get a foot on the property ladder. Is there any wonder young people don't vote for you?
Well, I think that's an important question for us, and that's an important question as we look at the election.
That's why I asked it.
The
What's
fact
the answer?
that we didn't do well amongst young people.
We know that.
I think we do have to improve our offer for young people. I think we need to provide more housing. I think we need to look at more money into schools, improving our schools as we go forward, and making sure that cities like mine in London are made more livable and more cost-effective for young people.
But why haven't you done that in the past 7 years?
Well,
instead, you've secured the pensioners and you've knocked young folk, and they've turned against you. I mean, why should young people believe in capitalism if they've got no chance of accruing any capital?
Well, I think what we have done over the last 7 years has actually been to build more homes. We just need to build them more quickly.
Your record on building homes is even worse than the last Labour government's, and you know that. 62% of 18 to 24-year-olds voted Labour. 62%. 56 of 25 to 34-year-olds. You didn't build enough houses for these people.
Well, that's one of the reasons why we're addressing that.
Why
we're going to be building
now?
1.5 million new homes over the course of this Parliament, and making sure actually what we have done with things like starter homes, shared ownership, is much more flexible forms of tenure to make sure that homes are more attractive for younger people, particularly younger people starting off in life with their
Ministers have been telling me this for 7 years, and you'd never do it.
Well, that is what the programme is designed to do, Andrew. We have been building more homes. We need to accelerate that. We also need an open conversation about how we improve our offer elsewhere for young people, say in schools and universities and so on.
All right, let's talk about Brexit. You're the international trade minister. Will the UK leave the customs union in March 2019, and when it does, will it then be able to make its own trade deals?
Well, our position on Brexit and the customs union is unchanged from
the
Prime Minister's position, which is to leave the single market and leave the customs union, but to have a comprehensive free trade agreement with the European Union and customs arrangements so that we have frictionless free trade with the European Union.
But will that happen by March 2019?
Well, that's obviously the negotiation that has just started. I am not putting an end date on that. What I am saying is the objective in this, Andrew, is to make sure sure that we have frictionless trade with the European Union and come to a future customs arrangement.
So it's not clear then that we will be able to start making our own trade deals after March 2019?
Well, once we leave the European Union, yes, I am clear that we will be able to make our own trade deals.
On March 2019?
Well, once we have left the European Union and we've left the customs union, we've come to a customs arrangement with the European Union. Yes, we will be able to make our free trade deals, but at the moment we can't because we're still in the European Union.
But will you be able to make them if there's a transition period or an implementation period?
Well, that remains to be seen.
So
we
you
don't
might
yet
not
know.
then?
We only just started the negotiation.
Yeah, but you've had a year to think about
Talk
it.
at this moment about a transition period and when that transition period might start or end. What we are clear about is there should be no cliff edge for businesses in the UK and the European Union, and to make sure that trade continues as frictionless as possible.
So we don't yet know if we'll be able to make our free trade deals during a transition period. Well, it could be postponed to 2021, 2022. We don't know.
To be fair, Andrew, we don't yet know if we're going to have a transition period. The objective in all of this, and let's stick to the objective, is to have frictionless free trade with the European Union and come to a customs arrangement. That is the objective.
No,
it is obviously a negotiation.
You're also Minister for London, so let's turn to the Grenfell Tower disaster. Kensington and Chelsea Council, it's in chaos. Why hasn't the government suspended it and sent in external commissioners?
Well, the leader resigned, as you know, on Friday. The chief executive has gone as well.
That's what I mean. It's in chaos. It's leaderless.
The right decision. We're waiting for a new leader to be elected for the council. I hope it's going to be somebody that we can work with. Well, because I think it's important for local democracy to have its say. It's quite a big thing for a government to do, to go in and put a council on special measures. It's almost a quasi-judicial role
but
there
it's in
for the
crisis.
Secretary of State.
You've lost the chief executive, you've lost the elected leader, you've lost the deputy leader. It is rudderless and leaderless and lacking in experience. Surely if there was ever a time to send in the commissioners to get a grip of this crisis, it's now.
Well, we're waiting for the new leader to come in place of the council. There is an interim chief executive who's come over from Lewisham Council and doing a good job there. I don't accept that. Clearly there'll be lessons to be learned, and a lot of this will be a matter for the public inquiry.
Will this new leader have any experience?
Well, that'll be a matter for the election within the Conservative group on the council, but I would very much hope and expect so. There are some very capable councillors in Kensington and Chelsea.
Well, we haven't seen much sign of that so far, have we? Did you have any involvement in the resignation of Council Leader Nick Paget-Brown?
Well, I'm not going to comment on that.
So you did.
As a local member of Parliament,
didn't you?
As a local member of Parliament, I speak to my council leader frequently, as I think all local MPs do.
So you were involved. You nudged them to go.
Well, I talked to that leader and the previous leader and the leader of my other council. It's natural that the MPs speak to their local council leader on an ongoing basis.
We know that the council opted for a cheaper cladding than initially intended because they wanted to quote the email, good costs. And perhaps that sort of cheese pairing is inevitable in town halls when central government, as yours has done, cut their budgets by 40%.
Well, I don't accept the premise of that, because actually a lot of financing to local government, as you all know, Andrew, has actually been devolved back to local government, particularly with reference to business rates and so on.
But overall, so you've cut central government financing by 40%.
Well, what we have said is there's 200 billion available over the rest of this Parliament, the next 4 years, to local councils. We believe that is a fair funding for local councils. And by the way, there's actually Kensington Chelsea Council, which spent £8.6 million on this refurbishment. There's not necessarily a sign of a shortage of funds.
No, indeed, they've got 274 million in reserves, but they put people at risk to save £300,000. If that's not a case for putting in the commissioners, what is? Well,
that is a matter for the ongoing inquiries.
But we know these
police
figures.
Inquiry.
We've seen the documents.
But the lessons to be learned from that and how that happened, I think crucially is a matter for the different inquiries, including the public inquiry.
All right. Greg Hans, thank you.
Thank you.
Theresa May's stated aim in calling the election last month was to get a stronger hand on the Brexit negotiations. In the end, the electorate gave her a weaker one. But it's worth remembering that there's a lot at stake for both sides in this negotiation. After all, the UK is a major net contributor to the EU budget and a big trading partner for the 27 countries remaining in the EU. Let's just take a look. When Mr Davis and Mr Barnier kicked off the talks a couple of weeks ago, the tone was businesslike and broadly constructive. The two men agreed that the first stage of the negotiation will cover 3 key areas: the rights of EU citizens living here and British citizens living in the EU, the financial settlement that the UK will pay the EU, and the Irish border. On citizens' rights, the EU published their proposals 3 weeks ago, and the UK government came forward with their plan last Monday. The UK offer, however, was greeted with scepticism. Mr Barnier himself tweeted, "More ambition, clarity and guarantees needed." The Dutch Prime Minister, Mark Rutte, said, "There are thousands of questions to ask." But elsewhere, some EU figures have begun to worry about the financial implications of Brexit for the remaining 27 countries. Günther Oettinger, the EU's budget commissioner, said this week that Brexit would leave a hole in the EU's finances of at least €10 billion a year. That's because the UK is a net contributor to the budget. The UK also runs a large trade deficit with the EU. Last year, we bought £312 billion worth of goods and services from the EU. That's £71 billion more than we sold to the EU. So the introduction of trade tariffs would be costly for both sides. The Brexit negotiations will continue every month. Messrs Davis and Barnier will have their next face-to-face meeting in Brussels on Monday, the 17th of July. And joining me now from Rome is Roberto Galtieri. He's a Socialist MEP and part of the European Parliament's Brexit team. Welcome to the programme, Mr Galtieri. The British government has published a detailed plan to protect the rights of EU citizens living in the UK. The EU response was highly critical and unhelpful. Is that going to be the EU's response to everything Britain proposes?
First, of course, we welcome the intention to protect the EU citizens, but our reading of the plan is that it falls short of its own ambitions. So there are a number of issues to be clarified and I think also to be corrected. For instance, while our proposal is based on EU law, this is based only on the UK law, and there are no guarantees that that might not be changed in the future. Then there is a famous issue of the enforcement, which is based only on UK courts. And third, there are a number of rights which seem to be missing. For instance, a family member who will have to make his own request for settled status, and we consider inconceivable that there might be two different answers to me and to my 5-year-old kid, for instance. Then there is the issue.
I think you've given enough points. You're quite right. There are plenty of areas still to discuss. But this wasn't a fait accompli. This wasn't a take it or leave it offer by the British government. It was the beginning of a negotiation. It was laying out the British position. Yet Mr Barnier said it lacked clarity and ambition. Your friend, Mr Verhofstadt, said it was worrisome. The Dutch Prime Minister said there were thousands of questions left unanswered. These are not helpful responses, are they?
It's not an issue of tones, it's an issue of starting a negotiation indeed. And so we are commenting the paper and identifying what is good. For instance, that the scoping of rights seems similar, while there are a number of loopholes, and there are some more fundamental issues relating to the legal status.
It just sounds very unconstructive. I mean, the tone just sounds unconstructive. Instead of saying, well, this is a good start, but of course there's much more to do, which would be constructive, you just sound unconstructive.
No, I don't think so. My first sentence is that I welcome the intention to protect the rights of EU citizens. That's a very constructive sentence. Then, of course, one has to be consistent and to find a mechanism which fully guarantees those rights. And the negotiations are there exactly for this purpose.
Brussels is now beginning to worry about how to fill the huge financial hole that Britain's departure will create in EU revenues. How would you fill it? There's a number of ideas being floated at the moment. Introduce an EU-wide VAT supplement, or take an axe to the common agricultural policy, which is still about 40% of the budget. Does any of that appeal to you?
There are two different problems. The first is to define the financial settlement, which has to be integral part of the withdrawal agreement, and where what we say we are not looking for fines, we are looking only for commitment to be paid. So a definition of a method to make this calculation. Then there is an issue for the future, where of course the Union will have to reassess and redefine and improve its mechanisms of own resources in order to be able for the future to have an efficient
So
budget.
which one do you like, an EU-wide VAT or a cutting cap or perhaps cutting money to Italy?
No, I think the Union deserves a better system of own resources instead of transfer for member states. This is for the future. We are working on that.
Do you agree with the Brussels Commission that every member of the EU should adopt the euro by 2025?
Yes, I think we have, of course, derogations are possible, as you know, like for the was for the United Kingdom, for Denmark, but in principle, the members of the Union are members with derogation to the monetary union. So we think that would be good to enlarge the euro area. Of course, there are certain criteria to be fulfilled, and of course, there is the political will of the country to be taken into account. But I think euro is proven to be a successful currency, protecting citizens. So I expect the membership will be broadened in the future.
If the euro has been so successful, why is Italy's GDP below what it was 15 years ago, and Italy's industrial output is below what it was in 1984? Why has the euro been so successful for you? And you used to run a balance of payments surplus with Germany. You now run a massive balance of payments deficit with Germany. Where's the success?
Oh, I think it should not be confused, the currency with the economic crisis we had, and also mistake in the conduct of European economic policy. I'm a strong critic of austerity politics, and now we are changing this for more growth-oriented policies
your country
at the union level. So the currency is a thing, the economic policy is another thing. So we need to change the economic policy.
Mr. Galtieri,
but the currency, the common currency, is a strong protection for all of us.
Your country has not grown since you joined the euro.
No, I think your assessment is not correct, identifying the causes, the roots, and the solution for the problem of my country. By the way, now Italy is growing, and that's good. Europe, euro area is growing. In 2017, is growing more than US and the UK.
Do you accept that if Britain had stayed in and had been forced to join the euro by 2025, it just wouldn't happen and would be out anyway, even if we'd voted to remain? There's just no public opinion support for joining the euro here.
No, this is a joke. Nobody say that if UK would stay in the union, UK would be forced to join the. Would say in the union would be forced to join the euro. This is simply not true. As I said, derogation are possible. That's already what happened. So I don't understand your question.
Because the Brussels Commission has said that it thinks everybody who's in the EU should adopt the euro by 2025.
As I said, no. Yeah, I mean, if you want to make a political statement, you are free to do. But the facts are different. The fact is that there are members with derogation to the euro that are supposed to join, and members who have decided to stay out of the euro and are free to stay out of the euro while staying in the EU. This is perfectly and will be perfectly possible. That's the truth.
All right. Mr. Galtieri, thank you very much for speaking to us from Rome today.
Thank you.
Jeremy Corbyn has had a bit of a spring in his step since the election, after doing much better than pretty much everybody expected. Indeed, despite the party's internal splits, Labour managed to gain 30 seats. But earlier this week, Labour's divisions on Brexit were thrust into the open as 50 Labour MPs defied the party line to vote in favour of a backbench amendment calling for the UK to remain members of the EU Single Market and Customs Union. One of those rebels was Labour MP Stella Creasy, who's had this to say on the MAR programme.
What a lot of us are saying is we want, in these negotiations, all options to be on the table. To have a government that has forced through a hard Brexit, especially in the light of the general election result, where the public very clearly rejected Theresa May's approach, doesn't make sense to us. And across the House, again, there are MPs saying we want to see all options. We don't know what is possible to achieve, but what we do know is if you walk in the room and you throw away something like single market membership, which 650,000 jobs in London alone are part of being part of that, it's irresponsible.
I'm joined now by the Shadow Justice Secretary, Richard Bergen. Welcome to the programme. Now, on Thursday, 49 Labour MPs, almost a fifth of the parliamentary party, rebelled against the leadership over Brexit. including 3 shadow ministers who were subsequently sacked by Jeremy Corbyn. Labour's now more divided on Brexit than the Tories, isn't it?
I don't believe so. I think the amendment was regrettable and premature, and I agree with the Labour Deputy Leader Tom Watson when he said he was disappointed about that, because actually the difference in the Labour Party is a difference of nuance on the single market between those who definitely want to be a member of a single market, including some people who back that amendment, and those who want tariff-free access to the single market. The reality is that not just on Brexit, but on a whole host of issues, it's the Conservative government that is completely divided and at odds with itself.
If it's just nuance then and you're not divided, mark our card then. The Shadow Chancellor says single market membership is not on the table. The Shadow Brexit Secretary says it should be. And another Shadow Minister, Barry Gardiner, talks about seeking reform membership of the single market and the customs union. Which one of these statements is Labour policy?
Well, Brexit's a settled issue in that Labour accepts that Britain's leaving the European Union, but we believe that Britain has to have a relationship with the institutions of the European Union.
Which one is Labour policy of these 3 statements?
Well, Labour believes that we should be having a jobs-first Brexit, a Brexit that puts the economy first. But as our manifesto says, Britain's leaving the European Union. And, for example, that also means that the freedom of movement of labour, and the UK's part of that, for example, will end when Britain leaves the European Union.
Do you want freedom of movement to end?
Well, what we do want to end is the practice of unscrupulous employers only recruiting workers from abroad, and also unscrupulous employers trying to use the freedom of movement of labour to drive down terms and conditions.
You can do that whether we're in or out of the single market. Do you want freedom of movement to end?
Well, it's inevitable that the free movement of labour will end when Britain leaves the European Union.
But do you want it to do so? That's the difference. Your manifesto just said what you've just said. I'm asking you if you want it to end.
What Labour wants is a Brexit that puts jobs in the economy first. What Labour doesn't want is to put immigration and false immigration targets, as the Conservatives have done previously,
What's the answer
at the
to
top
my
of the
question?
table. My answer to your question is quite simple. The free movement of labour will end in terms of the UK when Britain leaves the European Union. But Labour's priority is not any other issue than putting jobs in the economy first, and that's really, really important.
Putting jobs in the economy first, should we leave or stay in the customs union?
Well, I think we need to leave all the options open on that, and we need to negotiate without putting options off the table.
But you can't negotiate unless you know what your aim is. Now, is your aim to leave or remain in the customs union?
British manufacturers gain a lot, and their workers therefore do as well, in terms of jobs from the current arrangement in terms of the customs union. So what we want is an equivalent benefit. So we want the benefits of being in the customs union, even if when we leave the European Union we can't be in the customs union. But these are the kind of demands that Theresa May should be making, and her ability to do so, I'm afraid, has been severely weakened by the fact that she can't even command a majority now after she asked for a majority to do so.
And you've criticised the government for saying that no deal is better than a bad deal, which I understand. But does that mean then that Labour's position is that any deal is better than no deal? Any deal is better than no deal?
No, it'd be strange to say that any deal is better than no deal. We want a good deal for Britain.
Right. But if you can't get that?
Well, we're confident a Labour government could get that, because Labour's clear that we want a jobs-first Brexit that puts the economy first and puts living standards first, and doesn't use, as the Conservative government has tried to do, Brexit as a smokescreen to create some kind of low-regulated tax haven for the super rich of the shores of Europe.
Labour's position, because you could be in government very shortly and be in these negotiations. If the EU doesn't budge on demanding a €100 billion divorce bill, would you just suck that up for the sake of any deal? Or would you say no?
Well, a Labour government wouldn't be doing any sucking up to anybody, whether it be the EU or anyone else. And a Labour government would negotiate hard for Britain
But
with
what
the
if they wouldn't
democratic
budge?
legitimacy to do so.
What if they wouldn't budge on the demand for 100 billion euros? What would you do?
Well, these are hypothetical scenarios, and these negotiations are nuanced and complex. But Labour would campaign for, in opposition, hold the government to account for, and in government deliver a jobs-first Brexit that puts the economy first. Because the kind of post-Brexit Britain that we want to see is one in which there's investment in industry, assistance from the government in industry, and a more equal society with high-wage jobs.
Ian Lavery, he's your new party chairman, says that Labour is currently, quote, too broad a church. Do you agree with him?
Well, I think the Labour Party's always been a broad church. I think
he says it's too broad. Do you agree with him?
I think the Labour Party should be a broad church. It's always been a broad church of socialists, social democrats and trade unionists, and long may it continue to be so.
So you don't agree with him?
I think that the Labour Party is a broad church, and it should be.
OK. Do you support lowering the threshold of MPs needed that you need to get to stand for the Labour leadership? It's going to be debated at your autumn conference.
Well, of course, this question doesn't seem as topical as it used to, because the leadership election that many people predicted would be occurring after the general election won't be occurring.
Do you support it?
Tom Watson, the Deputy Leader, has said that Jeremy Corbyn is secure for many years. But I do believe that all parties, including the Labour Party, need to be made more democratic. We've got a membership of well over 500,000, and I would like the members to have more say in our party's policies and in the way the parties run.
Mr Corbyn spoke at a left-wing rally in London yesterday. Among the crowd, there were placards calling Theresa May a murderer. There were pictures of Mrs May's head on a spike. There were communist flags, Trotskyite banners. Are these the kind of people that Mr Corbyn should be associating himself with if he's a Prime Minister in waiting?
The reality is, when you speak at an outdoor meeting, you've got no control who turns up, you've got no control who's walking past, you've got no control over the kind of banners that people make. I understand there were 150,000 members of the public at that event.
No, there weren't. There was 15,000.
I spoke the night before the general election at an event in Leeds City Centre, and for all I know, there could have been all sorts of people walking past watching. I think the key thing is to judge Jeremy by his words, judge Labour by our words and what we've done. And we do believe in a new kind of politics, but we also believe in a politics that's committed to changing our society for the better.
All right. Mr Bergen, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you very much.